So we're going to be looking at monetary policy, and really the monetary policy stems from things that the Fed has done. The Fed has been around since 1913 of Woodrow Wilson's administration, and its whole purpose and why it was created is because when we looked back at the money supply, it was always dependent on the amount of gold in our money, in our money supply, right? That's how many paper dollars they could expend. And there was really a group of people who were upset about the gold supply, and they were called the Populist Party. I remember them from last year, that they wanted to add silver. If they add silver to our money supply, what could happen to it?
Inflate.
It would inflate, right? Causing more paper money to be out there. Well, the Fed, what they're going to do is they realize, are we going to find any more gold or silver in our supply? And so they realize we need to figure out a way to, and this is what was bugging Eric, is this expanding money. Okay, we're going to figure out how to expand our money supply without the dependency of gold and silver. And so today, our money is no longer representative, right? You can't go to the bank and take your green dollar bills up there and say, I want gold, right? Because they'll just look at you like you're crazy. But this is why the Fed was created, is because of that gold, that money supply that we're based on, that required every paper dollar to be based off gold. So the Fed was created in 1913 to be able to deal with the economic instabilities. When our economy declined, it needed to expand the money supply. And when our economy got too hot, it needed to decrease that money supply. And so we're going to look at the tools the Fed has to be able to do this. These are the three tools, and a lot of people get these tools confused with fiscal policy. And this is why I'm going to break up these two units, right? So there's three tools that the Fed uses. One is the reserve requirement, which we're going to get into today, and we're going to do some equations and some math with this. So the reserve requirement is the total percentage of a deposit that a Fed is requiring the banks to keep on hand. So let's just say Ryan, he goes up with his 2020 bill, right? And they say the bank must keep 10% of that on hand. How much was the bank keep? Oh, okay, maybe $202, right? All right, so let's do it in an easier increment. All right, Donovan goes up with a $100 bill, and the reserve requirement is 50%. How much of that $100 bill must the bank keep on hand? 50. And then what is left over, that 50, the bank can loan out. And we're going to talk about how this leads to the expansion of the money supply. Donovan can still go to the bank and get his $100 out if he needs it tomorrow. But by us putting money in the bank, that allows the bank to then loan out money, which will increase the money supply. And we're going to look at every single step of this because this is the most common tool banks will use. However, the most common tool that the Fed uses to increase the money supply is the open market operations, or the OMOs. We're going to see this is when the government, they sell bonds. This operation is the government creating money. So let's just say they build a wall, right? Does our government need money? And so what the Fed will do is they're going to sell bonds to banks. And when they sell these bonds to the banks, what does the banks give to them? Money. And that money can then be used to pay off whatever it is. Right? So what does that do to the money supply when the government sells? When the government sells bonds to people, it now has increased the money supply. Okay? So we're dealing with tools here about how the government, and this is why, have you ever heard like some countries have like triple hyperinflation? It's because their government is creating bonds and they're selling them, or they're buying them, and they're putting more money into the supply, right? The last one, and this is between the banks. If I'm boring you, we could go back to reading the book, okay? If I'm boring you out of your mind, wake up. The last one is the discount rate, and this is what the Fed and other banks charge each other when they need to get money. So let's just say Donovan and Ryan put all their money in the bank, but they want to go and get it the next day. And the bank has made a loan and they need to borrow some money to cover their daily expenses. This is what they'll take out. The one that we're going to be concerned with is this. This is what's going to lead to the creation of the money supply, and this is where AP will have a lot of your questions. The next one we'll be concerned about is this one. because this is how the government increases the money supply, which causes inflation, or it could cause deflation. This one right here won't be used so much. So what we're going to be looking at is other minor tools. We're going to see that the chairman of the Fed has moral suasion. They could make comments and stuff like that that could change the economy, off the record remarks. There's margin requirements. The Securities and Exchange Commission that was created under Roosevelt's administration, they oversee the buying and selling of stocks and making sure that everything has real value in the stock market. And these are the minor tools, but what we're going to focus mostly on is the reserve requirement and the open market operations. And so when our economy is doing bad, it is in a recession, our government is going to come out with easy money policy, which is going to bring out the tool of the Fed of the reserve requirement. They're going to decrease it. So we're in a contraction. Donovan puts in $100 and they say the reserve requirement is 10%. How much must they keep of that $100? 10. How much can they loan out? 90. Is that allowing more money to be in our supply to deal with this unemployment problem that people would take out loans, which will bring up our economy? So we're going to see the government will decrease the reserve requirement, allowing more money to be available in the banking system, and more loans will be able to get out. The other thing they're going to do is the discount rate. They're going to decrease it. So it's lower the level so other banks borrow from each other. The last one is the Fed is going to do open market operations where people have these bonds, right? They have bonds that they bought from the government. The government's going to take that back and they're going to give him money. What has just happened to the money supply? It's increased because they just created that money. Okay? So, do y'all get what the Fed is doing here? They are doing things because our economy has gone downward. And what they're doing is they're doing tools to increase the money supply. So I always remember down, boy, down, decrease the reserve requirement, buy, and decrease that discount rate. So this is how our money supply looks. And I know this curve looks weird, right? It is vertical, okay? The money supply is constant. And so now with decreasing the reserve requirement, buying that stuff and giving that person money for that bond, and decreasing the discount rate, what has just happened to the money supply? The money supply has what? Did it decrease or increase? Remember, I bought and I gave him, right? And I reduced the discount rate, right? And I reduced so it is now cheaper to get money, right? So what's going to happen to the money supply? Increase, so it moves to the right. Do you just see what has happened? Up here, the interest rate was really high. And now by doing all those tools, what have I done to the interest rate? I've lowered it, and so are people now encouraged in a contraction to be able to buy and take out those loans now so they could buy stuff. And this is what the Fed wants to do in a contraction. Again, we'll come back to this, okay? The other one is in an expansion. We know that there's too much money chasing too few goods, which we call this as demand pull inflation. And what the government wants to do is decrease the money supply. So that reserve requirement, they're going to raise it. Are they going to have it low like 10? No, they're going to raise it to, like, remember originally 50%? Donovan puts $100 in. The reserve requirement is $50. How much can they have to keep in hand? 50. How much could they loan out? 50. So the money supply is decreased from that 10%. This will cause banks to have less money available for loans. Less loans will mean less money that they could give out in credit. The other thing is the discount rates. They're going to raise it. Do banks want to take out loans from other banks? No, so they're not going to overextend their loaning process. And lastly, the Fed. What they're going to do is they're going to sell securities. So they sell securities. It's a bond, a treasury bond. They sell it to people. I sell it to Danny, right? And I take his what? Money. The money supply has just gone down. And so what they should do, if the government does this, right? They decrease the amount of money. Which way does that supply of money curve go? To the left. And just look what has happened to the interest rate. The interest rate has gone what? Do you want to borrow? No. okay? And in all actuality, this is what our government should be running right now. They should be increasing the reserve requirements. They should be increasing that discount rate. They should be selling because they need to contract our money supply. Is that happening? No, the Fed is not running this right now. Yes.
So I would suppose, like, when they say, they do all three of these things when they say raise interest rates in the news.
Raise it when I talk about a discount rate, that's just a loan, inter loans between the bank and another bank. When I talk about the federal interest rate, that is what the Fed charges other banks. And so all of that stuff comes into our rates, which I'm going to explain next week. Hello. Hi. I do. I will send you. Miss Middleton wants to see you. Miss Middleton, the principal in the counselor's office. Okay. So the effects of this on the aggregate demand curve. We're going to see a tight monetary policy. If the government were to do this, this would decrease the money supply. Right now, do you think our Fed is doing that? No. Our interest rate is really low. Okay? And that interest rate of what they're charging banks to banks and also the Fed to the bank also impacts on our interest rates. So our interest rates are really low. And they actually only went up a point recently. Okay? That's not enough. We're seeing that they're not running the right money supply. They should be running this, right? But they're running this. So what is happening to the amount of money in the supply? Easy. That means there's a lot of money out there. So what is this? Now you have money in your pockets, right? Are you demanding stuff? And you're demanding stuff and it's causing what kind of inflation? Demand pull inflation. And so now it's making that high in the business cycle really, really high when they're not running the right policy. This will all make sense as I start going more into monetary policy with y'all. So there's limitations on monetary policy. One, economic forecasting. Human behavior is not always predictable. We're seeing the Fed may lower the discount rate, which it's doing today, which causes the interest rate. And this was Eric's question. He's like, is the discount rate our interest rate? I was like, no. But the discount rate does then come into your interest rate. Because if that's what the banks and banks charge each other, aren't they going to pass that on to you? So let's just say the interest rate is 1% and they charge you 3% for a loan. It's actually going to be 2% the interest they're charging you, right? Because they have the discount rate there. Well, let's just say the discount rate goes up to 7%. Are they going to pass that on to you? Plus their interest rate, right? And so that discount rate really affects your interest rate. Hey, many people don't respond to what's going on with the loan system, but they're unsure about the economy. So we're going to see it's going to have less of an effect. We actually don't know what their policies are because it's not, do you hear them going out on the news and talking about this? No, this is never openly said. Okay, there's time lags with monetary policy. We're going to see the Fed does not have to get approval of Congress so they could act quicker. But we're going to see that to see the stuff to go to fruition, it does take time. And that's the outside leg. Okay? It can't fight stagflation. Y'all know what stagflation is. It's high unemployment and high inflation. Eventually, I'm going to get after fiscal policy, I'm going to deal with supply side that deals with this. And lastly, there's a lack of coordination between the Fed and our government. Our government does fiscal policy, and they act entirely different than what our Fed does because our Fed is elected. They are a separate entity. They're not put in there by the people. Okay. Last thing is Milton Friedman. He's the one who talks about that. I know there's a lot of this stuff. He says we have to let the money supply grow at a constant rate because are we always going to see inflation? And he says if we do that, that will help combat it. Okay, I got your eyes like glazed over. I'm sorry. This will all come into play when we start looking at the little chunks separately. So let me look at this next little chunk with you, which I was kind of doing about one of their most common tools. So what we're going to look at is how banks create money. Okay? So money creation occurs when commercial banks extend loans. Okay? Because the Fed has made requirements on them, which we just saw with monetary policy, right? Now we're going to look at one little thing, and this one gets a little bit more exciting because y'all get to do some math with it. We're going to see the amount of money created is determined by the Federal Reserve when they set the reserve requirement. So let's look at this. Here's another $100 deposit. All right. The reserve requirement is 20%. So let's look at this. If you deposit $100, the bank must keep $20. How much, okay, how much can they loan out now? 80. This is a T chart here. We're going to get a little bit to this on Thursday. Anytime I have liabilities, it will go on this side. An asset is something that the bank now has. Okay? So what is the liability for the bank? What is it? You put money in there. Is that a liability? Yes. Like if I were to lend Eric $5, is that my liability now? Yes, because he could either pay it back to me or he could either what? No. Not. When he pays it back to me, is that now an asset? Yes. So my liability, my demand deposit is going to be my liability. So let's just say it's $100. Now, the time deposit zero, don't worry about this. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to calculate the reserve requirements. And this is simple math, what we're doing. I'm going to take 100 times 0.20, that gives me $20. So then we're setting up stuff that we're going to do next time on T-charts. So do y'all see reserve requirement, required reserve is 20. That is the much they have to put in the bank vault. Can they lend out that $20? This next part is how do I calculate excess reserves? What can they loan out? I take 100 minus 20, that gives me 80, and that's going to go over there. Okay? What you have to understand, whatever is on this side of the equation is the same thing going to be over here. So how much did this side add up to? 100. Does this side add up to 100? Both sides must add up to 100 because they are equal. My liability should equal up to my assets when I have the T-charts. Alright, so then they make 0 loans, so their total is 100. Okay? So now let's look at this. The bank now makes a loan of $80. Their excess reserve now goes down to 0. How much does their loans go up to? 80. So now, does this side right here equal this side? Yes. 20 plus 80, that's 100, right? Even though I took it off here, right? Okay, so this is one of the things with the T-charts, which we'll get into, and I'm kind of leaning into what we're going to do next time, so you understand that, okay? So now just know both sides must always equal. Okay, so how much money was just created by this loan? They loaned it out. How much did they create? 80. So let's just say this was Donovan's $100, right? He deposits it in. They have to keep 20. They loan it out to Aaron. Is Aaron in possession of new money now? Yes, but can Donovan still go to the bank and get his $100?
How does that work?
We're going to do time and time again. I'm going to get to it. You're asking the full...
Okay.
You're going to see this. This happens every day in the banking system. Because now everybody goes in. It's payday. They deposit their check, right? The bank then looks at the end of the day. They look at their liabilities. How much has people put in here? The reserve requirement is this. Great. This is how much have. This is how much I keep. This is how much I could loan out. Someone comes and gets a loan, right? They take from this. They put it there. And this is how money's created in our money system. And so every day, those things change, right? People put more money in the bank. And so that then changes what the required reserve is, how much they can loan out. And so then the bank, what you just did, right? You put your $100 in, but they loaned it to Aaron. Aaron now can go do what? What is he going to do with that money? But before he buys stuff, he's going to put it in the bank. Okay, is the bank going to have to take a reserve requirement from that? And then are they going to have excess reserves? Can they make another loan? And I'm going to take you step by step.
Full circle.
Yes, and I'm going to get there, and I'm going to tell you how to get a cheat so we can know what happens to the full money supply. Because that's what Donovan's question was. Like, Can I figure out how much one deposit will go into? Yes, and that's what we're gonna figure out today. So let's just say he makes this loan. Now the loan is made to Aaron, right? Aaron has his $80, but does Donovan still have his 100? Yes, the bank makes a loan. So now this side is gonna equal to what? 80. So how much of this can they loan out? What is the required reserves first? 80 times 20, 0.20 gives me 16, right? So 80 minus 16 gives me what of excess reserves? 64. Does this side equal this side? What could they do with this 64? They can loan it out, right? And then that would mean that this is equal to 0 and this is equal to 64. So I think about 80 plus 64, that gives me 144 of money that has just been created off the original deposit of 100. Okay? So this is what we're just doing. They can loan out 64. But does it equal on both sides? Okay, so now let's look at how much can they make off 64. Okay, now someone else gets a loan. Garrett gets a loan. He has $64, but he's gonna have to put it in the bank. They're gonna have to take out 0.20, right? So this is like, is it like 11 something? I don't know, tell us, 1280, right? Then 64 minus 1280, that gives me $51.20. Does this now equal both sides? And we could keep on going down and down into the vicious cycle, which you were talking about, but there's a shortcut, which we'll get to. All right, so how much money? This is what we're talking about. From Donovan's original 100, they have made $195.20, right? But does Donovan still have his money? Yes. Does Aaron still have his money? Does Garrett have his money? But it's because of that reserve requirement that the bank only has to hold on a little portion, and thus now they could expand the economy, right? And so we're going to talk about the shortcut about how to figure out how much money from Donovan's original purchase will that affect the money supply. And I could keep on going down, right? One by one by one by one. I guess I was so meticulous one day. Okay.
Wait,
I have taken your $100 all the way down to $21.97 a deposit. Okay? And that has taken about all the new money that's been created. But I'm going to show you a shortcut. Okay? Eventually it's going to be $400 when you calculate it all out. Okay? So there's a way to get through this. It's called the money multiplier. So the calculating the money multiplier is the shortcut to figure out how the expansion of money is created through the deposit system. So the money multiplier is 1 over the reserve requirement. What did I say the reserve requirement we were doing is? 1 over what? 0.20. And that would give me 1 divided by 0.20 gives me a number of what?
No,
5. That is my money multiplier now. Okay? So we will see several of these as shortcuts. So I could calculate the creation of money. Right? So I will take the maximum creation, that's what I'm looking for, times the excess reserves. What was Donovan's original purchase? He deposited into the bank. How much did he deposit? 100. But they must keep how much in that bank? 20. So what is the excess reserves? 80 times my money multiplier, which is what? 5. 5 times 80 gives me 400. And that's how I, instead of going step by step by step, I could have figured out from that original amount how much the money supply would increase would be $400. Okay. So the required reserves after the maximum money creation. Right? I could also look at how much the reserves will expand. How much was his reserved amount that they must keep on hand? 20 times the money multiplier, which is what? That's 100 that the required reserves will increase.
So is that how they pay them back?
Huh?
Is that how they pay them back?
Who? No. This is how much the required reserves of what the bank has to hold on in the system. And so now with all these loans, you know that they're charging you interest, right? And so that's how the bank makes profit. But it only makes profit off of that interest if people take out what? Loans. And the bank cannot make loans without people putting what in their bank? Money. So if the government wants our economy to expand, right? What happens to the discount rate? It has to what? Be lower, right? And so that means that there's more money that could be out there. If our economy is getting too hot, what must they do with that interest, the reserve requirement? Increase it, right? So the banks are holding on more of that money. Right. So this is what we did. Here are all of our equations that we just did. So now it's the time for the worksheet.